My name is Olivia. I'm 28 years old, and I'm about to tell you the story of how a $10 million inheritance nearly destroyed the love of my life. 3 days before what was supposed to be the wedding of my dreams, everything I thought I knew about love, family, and money came crashing down around me. Imagine planning the perfect wedding, only to have your future in-laws hand you an ultimatum that would change everything forever. You won't believe what happened next, and honestly, I'm still processing it all myself. Have you ever had to choose between love and your principles? If you've ever been caught between family pressure and following your heart, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support means the world to me, and I have a feeling you'll relate to every twist in this story. Picture this. You're standing in your dream wedding dress, looking at yourself in the mirror, and suddenly you realize that the fairy tale you've been living might actually be a nightmare in disguise. The man I was about to marry, David, came from old money. The kind of family where your last name opens doors and your bank account determines your worth. But here's the thing about fairy tales that nobody tells you. Sometimes the castle comes with chains you never saw coming. What would you do if your $10 million wedding was about to be ruined by an inheritance dilemma that would test everything you believed about love? Money has this strange way of revealing people's true colors, doesn't it? I thought I was marrying into a family that valued love above all else, but I was about to learn a lesson that would shake me to my core. David's mother, Patricia, had always been polite to me, but there was something in her smile that never quite reached her eyes. His father, Richard, would nod approvingly when I spoke, but I could sense him calculating my worth like a business transaction. Little did I know that behind those perfectly pressed suits and pearl necklaces, they were already planning how to protect their precious family fortune from someone like me. The wedding preparations had been going smoothly for months, or so I thought. We had chosen the most beautiful venue, a historic mansion overlooking the coast, with gardens that looked like something out of a romantic movie. Every detail was perfect, from the hand-picked roses to the string quartet that would play as I walked down the aisle. David seemed genuinely excited, talking about our future together and how happy he was to finally make me his wife. But there were moments, small ones, where I noticed him getting tense phone calls from his parents, conversations that would end abruptly when I entered the room. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs. But when you're in love, you tend to paint everything in the brightest colors possible. I convinced myself that his parents' coldness was just their way of being protective, that once we were married, they would warm up to me. I told myself that David's nervous energy was just pre-wedding jitters, nothing more than excitement about our big day. But deep down, something felt off, like a storm was brewing just beyond the horizon. That storm was about to hit, and it would change everything I thought I knew about the man I was about to marry. I didn't grow up with silver spoons or trust funds. My story starts in a small apartment above my mom's flower shop in downtown Portland. My father passed away when I was 12, leaving my mother, Elena, to raise me and my younger brother, Marcus, on her own. She worked 14-hour days arranging flowers for other people's special moments while teaching us that hard work and integrity were the only things that truly mattered. We didn't have much money, but we had each other, and that felt like everything. My childhood was filled with the smell of fresh roses and the sound of my mother humming while she worked, creating beauty from simple things. I want you to know that your background doesn't define your worth, so please subscribe and like this video if you believe that dreams are bigger than circumstances. I'd love to hear your own story in the comments below. Education became my way out, my ticket to a different life, but I never forgot where I came from. I worked 3 jobs through college, cleaning offices at night, tutoring kids on weekends, and serving coffee before my morning classes. My faith kept me grounded during those exhausting years, reminding me that God had a plan even when I couldn't see it. Every late night studying felt like an investment in a future where I could honor my mother's sacrifices and maybe even help other families like ours. My mother always told me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch and the love you give. She would say, "Mija, rich people can buy beautiful flowers, but they can't buy the hands that arrange them with love." Those words shaped everything I believed about success and happiness, but they also made me naive about how the other half really lived. I graduated with honors, got a good job at a marketing firm, and started building the life I had always dreamed of. But I had no idea that my humble beginnings would later become a weapon used against me by people who had never worked a day in their lives. The faith that got me through those difficult years wasn't just about Sunday services and prayers before meals. It was about believing that good things happen to good people, that love conquers all, and that integrity always wins in the end. My mother raised me to see the best in people, to trust that everyone has good intentions until they prove otherwise. Looking back, I realized that this beautiful naivety would both bless and curse me in ways I never imagined. I approached relationships, including my relationship with David, with an open heart and complete trust. When I met David 2 years ago at a charity event, I thought I had found someone who shared my values and understood what really mattered in life. He seemed different from other wealthy men I had encountered. He was humble, kind, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. We spent hours talking about everything from our favorite books to our hopes for the future, and he never once made me feel small or unworthy. But what I didn't realize was that falling in love with someone from a completely different world would mean navigating waters I had never even imagined existed. The night I met David changed my entire world, though I had no idea at the time that it would also nearly destroy it. It was at a charity gala for children's literacy, one of those fancy events where tickets cost more than most people make in a month, but the cause was something I deeply cared about. I was there representing my marketing firm, wearing a dress I had saved up for months to buy, feeling completely out of place among all the designer gowns and diamond jewelry. David was standing by the silent auction table, looking surprisingly relaxed for someone in a $1,000 suit, and when our eyes met across the room, it felt like something out of a romantic movie. He smiled at me with such genuine warmth that all my nervousness just melted away. If you've ever felt like an outsider looking in, hit subscribe and like this video. I want to hear about the moment someone made you feel like you truly belonged. When David approached me, he didn't lead with his last name or his family's business like so many wealthy men do at these events. Instead, he asked me what I thought about the literacy program we were supporting, and actually listened to my answer with genuine interest. We talked for hours that night, completely forgetting about the fancy dinner and speeches happening around us. He told me about his passion for education reform, and I shared stories about growing up in my mother's flower shop. For the first time in my life, I felt seen and valued by someone who could have chosen to talk to anyone in that room. Our love story started like something out of a fairy tale, but even fairy tales have shadows if you know where to look. David would pick me up in his simple Honda Civic, not the Ferrari or Mercedes I expected from someone with his background, and we'd go to little coffee shops and local bookstores instead of expensive restaurants. He seemed to genuinely enjoy my world, spending Saturday mornings helping my mother arrange flowers and Friday nights watching movies on my tiny apartment couch. We would talk until sunrise about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears like we had known each other forever. Looking back, I think those early days were the most honest our relationship would ever be. The red flags were subtle at first, like whispers in a language I didn't understand yet. David would sometimes get mysterious phone calls that would make his whole body tense up, and he'd step outside to take them with an apologetic smile. When I asked about his family, he would change the subject or give vague answers about how they were traditional and set in their ways. He never invited me to family gatherings or mentioned introducing me to his parents, always saying they were traveling or busy with business. I told myself it was because our relationship was still new, that he wanted to be sure about us before involving his family. But love has this way of making you blind to the very things you should be paying attention to. Our romance felt like a beautiful flower growing in secret, away from the harsh light of reality that might wilt its delicate petals. David made me feel like I was the most important person in his world, and for 8 amazing months that was enough. We were building something pure and real, or so I thought, completely unaware that outside forces were already plotting to tear us apart. What I didn't know was that his family had been watching me from the very beginning, researching my background like I was some kind of threat to their empire. The proposal happened on a rainy Thursday evening in my mother's flower shop, surrounded by the scent of fresh peonies and the soft glow of afternoon light filtering through rain-streaked windows. David had been acting nervous all week, stumbling over his words and checking his phone constantly, but I attributed it to work stress from his family's investment firm. My mother had conveniently found an excuse to run errands, leaving us alone among the flowers that had shaped my childhood dreams. When David got down on one knee right there between the roses and baby's breath, my heart felt like it might burst from pure happiness. The ring was simple and elegant, nothing flashy or ostentatious, just like the man I had fallen in love with. If you believe that the most beautiful moments happen in the simplest places, please subscribe and like this video. I'd love to know where your most precious memories were made. Olivia, he said with tears in his eyes, you've shown me what real love looks like, and I want to spend the rest of my life learning from you. His words were perfect, but more than that, they felt true in a way that touched my soul. We cried together right there among my mother's flowers, talking about the future we would build and the family we hoped to have. When my mother returned and saw us celebrating, she wrapped us both in the biggest hug and whispered a prayer of gratitude in Spanish. That moment felt like the culmination of every dream I had ever dared to dream. The engagement period was like living in a golden bubble where everything felt possible and beautiful. David became even more attentive and loving, bringing me coffee every morning before work and leaving little notes in my purse for me to find throughout the day. We spent our weekends looking at apartments and planning our future, talking about the kind of life we wanted to build together. He seemed genuinely excited about the idea of a simple wedding, maybe something small and intimate with just our closest family and friends. We dreamed about traveling together, about the books we would read side by side, about growing old and still holding hands like teenagers in love. But then the wedding planning began, and slowly, subtly, everything started to change. David's family suddenly became very interested in our plans, with his mother Patricia calling to offer suggestions that felt more like commands. They insisted that a small wedding wouldn't be appropriate for someone of David's standing, that we needed to think about appearances and family reputation. Suddenly, our intimate ceremony became a 300-person extravaganza at the most expensive venue in the city. The simple flower arrangements I had dreamed of were replaced with elaborate displays that cost more than most people's cars. Every decision seemed to slip further and further away from what we actually wanted. Looking back now, I can see that this was when the first cracks began to show in our perfect world. David started seeming stressed and distant during wedding planning meetings, agreeing to his parents' demands with a resignation that confused me. When I tried to talk to him about scaling things back, he would say that it was important to his family, and that we should just go along with their wishes to keep the peace. The man who had proposed to me in a flower shop was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone who seemed more concerned about family approval than our happiness. But I was so in love and so excited about our future that I convinced myself these were just temporary growing pains, obstacles we would overcome once we were actually married. The first time I met David's parents was at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the waiters wear white gloves and the menu doesn't have prices. Patricia Wellington arrived wearing pearls that probably cost more than my car, and Richard Wellington looked like he had stepped out of a business magazine cover. They were polite, almost painfully so, but there was something cold about their smiles that made me feel like I was being interviewed rather than welcomed into the family. David seemed tense throughout the entire dinner, his usual easy laugh replaced by nervous chuckles and careful responses to his parents' questions. I tried my best to be charming and respectful, sharing stories about my work and my family, but I could feel them evaluating every word I said. If you've ever felt judged before you even had a chance to prove yourself, please subscribe and like this video. I want to hear about how you handled those uncomfortable situations. The questions they asked seemed innocent enough on the surface, but looking back, I can see they were gathering intelligence like detectives building a case. "So, Olivia, what does your mother do for work?" Patricia asked with that practiced smile, and when I proudly explained about the flower shop, I watched her exchange a quick glance with Richard. They asked about my education, my career goals, my family's background, all while maintaining that polite facade that wealthy people use to hide their real thoughts. David kept trying to steer the conversation toward lighter topics, but his parents always found a way to circle back to questions about my background and circumstances. The subtle digs started small, like tiny paper cuts that you don't notice until they start to sting. Patricia would make comments about how refreshing it was to meet someone so down-to-earth, the word dripping with condescension. Richard would nod approvingly when I mentioned working multiple jobs through college, saying how admirable it was that some people had to work so hard for what others took for granted. They never said anything directly insulting, but every compliment felt like it came with an asterisk, a reminder that I was different, that I didn't belong in their world. David would squeeze my hand under the table during these moments, as if he was trying to apologize without words. The real tension became obvious when the conversation turned to our wedding plans and future together. Patricia started talking about the importance of protecting family assets, and how modern couples need to be practical about financial arrangements. She mentioned several family friends who had gotten married recently, and how smart they were to handle the business side of marriage properly. Richard chimed in with stories about prenuptial agreements and how they were just standard practice in their social circle. Nothing personal, just good business sense. I felt David go rigid beside me, and I began to understand that this dinner wasn't about getting to know me, it was about setting the stage for something much bigger. By the time we left the restaurant that night, I felt like I had been put through some kind of test that I hadn't even known I was taking. David was unusually quiet on the drive home, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. When I asked him about his parents' comments about prenups and financial arrangements, he assured me it was just their way of being cautious, that it didn't mean anything. But I could see the conflict in his eyes, the way he was torn between the woman he loved and the family that had shaped his entire life. That night marked the beginning of a war I didn't even know was being declared, with me as the unwitting target and David caught helplessly in the middle. 3 weeks before our wedding, while I was addressing the last batch of invitations in my tiny apartment, my phone rang with news that would change everything. It was Mr. Thompson, a lawyer I had never heard of, calling to inform me that my grandfather, my father's father, who had passed away when I was just 5, had left me something in his will. I barely remembered Grandpa Miguel, just fuzzy memories of a kind man who smelled like coffee and always had butterscotch candies in his pockets. The lawyer explained that there had been complications with the estate that took years to resolve, but now, finally, I was being notified of my inheritance. When he told me the amount, I had to sit down because my legs literally gave out beneath me. $10 million. If you've ever received news that completely turned your world upside down, please hit subscribe and give this video a like. I need to know if you can relate to having your entire reality shift in a single phone call. $10 million. I couldn't even wrap my head around that number. Growing up, $100 felt like a fortune, and now I was being told that my grandfather, who I remembered as a simple man, had somehow accumulated this incredible wealth. Mr. Thompson explained that my grandfather had been a brilliant investor who lived modestly, but made smart financial decisions over decades, never touching the money because he wanted to leave something significant for his family. The inheritance came with some conditions and legal complexities, but the bottom line was clear. I was about to become wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. The first person I called was my mother, and I'll never forget the sound of her crying through the phone when I told her the news. She revealed that my grandfather had always talked about taking care of his family, but she never imagined it would be anything like this. "Mija," she whispered, "your abuelito always said that money should be used to lift people up, never to put them down." Her words would prove to be more prophetic than either of us realized at the time. We spent hours talking about what this meant for our family, how we could use this blessing to help others, and how surreal it felt to go from struggling to financially secure overnight. When I told David about the inheritance that evening, his reaction was strange in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. He was happy for me, of course, congratulating me and talking about how wonderful it was that my grandfather had provided for his family this way. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of worry or concern that he tried to hide behind his smile. He asked a lot of questions about the conditions of the inheritance, the legal aspects, and when the money would actually be available. At the time, I thought he was just being practical, looking out for my best interests. But now I wonder if he was already thinking about how his parents would react to this news. What I didn't realize was that this inheritance would become both a blessing and a curse, a gift that would reveal the true nature of the people around me. The money itself wasn't the problem. It was what it represented to David's family, and how it would shift the power dynamic they had worked so hard to establish. That night, as I lay in bed thinking about my grandfather's generosity and the possibilities it opened up, I had no idea that this inheritance would soon become the weapon David's parents would use to try to destroy our relationship. But there was something else I didn't know yet, something that would make this whole situation even more complicated than I could imagine. The confrontation came 2 days after I told David about the inheritance, and it happened in the most intimidating setting possible, Richard Wellington's corner office on the 40th floor of their family's investment firm building. Patricia had called me personally, her voice sweet as honey but with an undertone of steel, asking if I could meet with them to discuss some important wedding details. When I arrived, they were both waiting for me behind Richard's massive mahogany desk, with legal documents spread out like battle plans. The city stretched out behind them through floor-to-ceiling windows, making them look like corporate royalty surveying their kingdom. I felt small and out of place in my simple work dress, but I tried to project confidence as I sat across from them. If you've ever walked into a room knowing you're about to be ambushed, please subscribe and like this video. I want to hear how you handled being outnumbered by people with more power than you. "Olivia," Patricia began with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes, "we've been thinking about your recent windfall, and we believe it's time to have an honest conversation about protecting everyone's interests." She slid a thick document across the desk toward me, explaining that it was a prenuptial agreement that would safeguard both families' assets in case of divorce. The language was complex and full of legal jargon, but the message was clear. They wanted to ensure that David's family fortune remained untouched by my newfound wealth, and vice versa. What they presented as protection felt more like preparation for failure. Richard leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone he probably used in business negotiations, explaining that prenups were standard practice among families of their social standing. He talked about divorce statistics and the importance of being realistic about modern marriage, as if love was just another business transaction to be managed and controlled. They had clearly done their homework about my inheritance, knowing details that I hadn't even shared with David yet, which made me realize they had been investigating my family's financial situation behind my back. The prenup they wanted me to sign was heavily skewed in their favor, with clauses that would leave me with almost nothing if our marriage ended, regardless of the circumstances. But then came the real ultimatum, delivered by Patricia with the kind of cold precision that made my blood run cold. Of course, darling, if you feel that signing this agreement is problematic for you, we would completely understand if you decided that perhaps you and David aren't as compatible as you initially thought. She said it with such casual cruelty, as if she was discussing the weather, but her meaning was crystal clear: sign the prenup or lose David forever. Richard nodded in agreement, adding that they just wanted what was best for everyone involved, and that sometimes love wasn't enough to overcome fundamental differences in values and backgrounds. They made it sound like they were doing me a favor by giving me this choice. The room felt like it was closing in on me as I realized that these people had been planning this moment for weeks, maybe even months. They had waited until I had something to lose, not just David, but my newfound financial security, before making their move. Patricia mentioned that David was torn about the whole situation, but that he understood the importance of family unity and making practical decisions. As I sat there holding that prenup, I understood that this wasn't just about protecting money. It was about power, control, and making sure I knew my place in their world. They were betting that I would choose security over principles, that I would sign their papers and become the grateful, compliant daughter-in-law they could manage and control. That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the prenup documents until the words blurred together, my heart racing with a mixture of anger, fear, and complete confusion. The papers felt heavy in my hands, not because of their physical weight, but because of everything they represented: the death of trust, the price of love, and the ugly reality of what David's family really thought of me. I kept reading the same clauses over and over, trying to understand how people who claimed to care about their son's happiness could be so calculating about his future. Every line felt like another nail in the coffin of the fairy tale I had been living, another reminder that in their world, love was secondary to financial protection. If you've ever had to choose between your heart and your principles, please subscribe and like this video. I need to know how you found the strength to make the hard choice when everything was on the line. The worst part wasn't even the prenup itself. It was the realization that David must have known this was coming. All those tense phone calls, all those conversations that stopped when I entered the room, all his strange behavior during wedding planning, it all made sense now. He had been preparing for this moment, maybe even helping his parents plan it, and that betrayal hurt more than any legal document ever could. I felt like I had been living with a stranger, someone who could compartmentalize his love for me from his loyalty to his family's expectations. My mother found me crying at my kitchen table at 3 a.m, surrounded by crumpled tissues and legal papers. When I told her what had happened, her face went through so many emotions: anger, sadness, disappointment, and finally, a fierce protective determination that reminded me why she had been able to raise 2 children on her own after my father died. "Mija," she said, taking my hands in hers, "your grandfather didn't leave you that money so you could buy your way into someone else's family. He left it to you because he believed in your strength and your worth." Her words cut through all the confusion and fear, reminding me of who I was before David and his family entered my life. The internal battle was brutal, because it wasn't just about choosing between money and love. It was about choosing between the person I had always been and the person I might become if I signed those papers. If I agreed to their terms, I would be admitting that my worth was negotiable, that my place in David's life came with conditions and limitations. But if I refused, I would be walking away from the only man I had ever truly loved, destroying our wedding plans, and possibly proving his parents right about our fundamental incompatibility. I prayed harder that night than I had since my father's funeral, asking God to show me the path that would honor both my love for David and my respect for myself. But as the sun rose over my small apartment, painting everything in soft golden light, I began to understand that this wasn't really about the prenup or the money at all. This was about power dynamics, about whether I would allow myself to be diminished and controlled by people who saw me as a threat to their empire. David's parents hadn't just asked me to sign a legal document, they had asked me to sign away my dignity, my equality in the relationship, and my right to be treated as an equal partner in my own marriage. The choice before me wasn't between love and money, it was between love with conditions and love with respect. And I was beginning to realize that those might be mutually exclusive in the Wellington family. The conversation I had been dreading finally happened 3 days later, in the same park where David and I had shared our first picnic together 8 months earlier. I had asked him to meet me there because I needed to see his face when we talked, away from the influence of his family's marble floors and intimidating offices. He arrived looking exhausted, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his eyes rimmed with the kind of fatigue that comes from sleepless nights and impossible choices. We sat on the same bench where we used to feed ducks and dream about our future, but now the distance between us felt like an ocean neither of us knew how to cross. The autumn leaves were falling around us like confetti from a celebration that had ended before it began. If you've ever had to confront someone you love about their betrayal, please subscribe and like this video. I want to know how you found the courage to ask the hard questions when your heart was breaking. David, I began, my voice steadier than I felt inside. I need you to be completely honest with me about what happened in your parents' office. His shoulders sagged like he had been carrying the weight of the world, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the man I fell in love with, vulnerable, conflicted, and genuinely pained by the situation we found ourselves in. He tried to explain that his parents were just being protective, that they didn't really know me yet, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. I could see in his eyes that he knew what his family had done was wrong, but he seemed powerless to do anything about it. The pain in his voice was real when he told me about the pressure he had been under since the moment he told his parents about our engagement. They had questioned everything about our relationship, my motives, my background, my worthiness to be part of their family legacy. He described family meetings where I was discussed like a business problem to be solved, strategy sessions where they planned how to handle the situation of his relationship with someone beneath their social status. They made me feel like loving you was a mistake, he whispered, and those words cut deeper than any prenup clause ever could. Here was the man I was supposed to marry in just days, admitting that his family had poisoned his mind against me. But what hurt most was when I asked him directly, "Did you know they were going to ambush me with that prenup?" The long pause before his answer told me everything I needed to know, but I waited for him to say the words anyway. "Yes," he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. "But I thought if you just signed it, we could move forward and prove them wrong about us over time." That admission felt like a physical blow because it revealed how fundamentally he had misunderstood what they were asking of me. He saw it as a temporary inconvenience, a piece of paper we could ignore once we were married, but I saw it as a permanent symbol of my second-class status in his family. The conversation that followed was one of the most painful of my life, not because we were angry with each other, but because we both realized how impossible our situation had become. David was torn between the family that had shaped his entire identity and the woman he claimed to love more than anything. He begged me to understand his position, to see that he was just as trapped as I was. But I needed him to understand that love without courage is just sentiment. "I need you to choose me," I told him. "Not because I'm demanding it, but because you believe I'm worth fighting for." The silence that followed that statement stretched between us like a chasm neither of us knew how to bridge. That night, after hours of prayer and soul-searching, I made the decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. Sitting in my childhood bedroom surrounded by photos of my family and the simple treasures that had shaped my values, I knew what I had to do. The prenup sat on my desk like a test of my character, and every fiber of my being rebelled against signing something that would make me a junior partner in my own marriage. My grandfather's inheritance wasn't just money, it was his belief in my worth, his investment in my future, and his trust that I would use his gift to build something meaningful. I couldn't dishonor his memory by trading my dignity for acceptance into a family that saw me as a threat to be managed. If you've ever had to make a choice that scared you but felt right in your soul, please subscribe and like this video. I want to hear about the moment you chose courage over comfort. I called Mr. Thompson, the lawyer handling my grandfather's estate, and asked him to review the Wellington family's prenup. His reaction was immediate and visceral. He called it one of the most lopsided agreements he had ever seen, designed to strip you of any financial power or security in the marriage. He explained that signing it would essentially make me financially dependent on David's goodwill, with no protection if the marriage failed or if his family decided to make my life miserable. "Your grandfather left you this inheritance specifically to ensure your independence," he said. "Don't sign it away to people who don't value you." The decision felt both terrifying and liberating, like jumping off a cliff while trusting that I had wings I didn't know existed. I spent hours writing a letter to David, trying to explain why I couldn't sign the prenup without making it sound like an ultimatum or an attack on his family. I wrote about love requiring mutual respect, about partnerships needing equality, and about how his parents' demands would poison our marriage before it even began. "I'm not asking you to choose between me and your family," I wrote, "but I am asking you to stand up for the woman you claim to love when she's being treated unfairly." The letter took me 3 attempts to write because I kept crying and smudging the ink. But beyond the emotional aspects, there was a practical reality I had to face. I was about to potentially walk away from a $10 million wedding and the social security that came with being part of the Wellington family empire. Everyone would think I was crazy for choosing pride over pragmatism, for risking everything over what they would see as just a piece of paper. My own doubts crept in during the quiet moments. Was I being too stubborn, too idealistic about how marriage should work in the real world? Maybe other women had signed similar agreements and found happiness anyway, adapting to their husband's family expectations and building love within those constraints. Yet every time I imagined myself signing that prenup, I felt like I was betraying not just myself, but every woman who had ever been told she wasn't good enough, every person who had ever been asked to make themselves smaller to fit into someone else's world. My faith taught me that I was created with inherent worth and dignity, not because of my bank account or my family name, but because I was a child of God deserving of love and respect. Standing up to the Wellington family wasn't just about my relationship with David. It was about refusing to let money and power determine my value as a human being. The hard path was the right path, even if it meant walking it alone. The morning I delivered my letter to David, along with the unsigned prenup, felt like the longest day of my entire life. I had asked him to meet me at the coffee shop where we had our first real date, hoping that being in a place filled with happy memories might soften the blow of what I had to say. His hands shook as he read my letter, and I watched his face go through a dozen different emotions: surprise, hurt, understanding, fear, and finally, a resignation that broke my heart. When he finished reading, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "I knew you would choose this path, and honestly, I'm proud of you for it, but I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight my family the way you're asking me to." That admission told me everything I needed to know about where we stood. If you've ever had to watch someone you love crumble under family pressure, please subscribe and like this video. I need to know how you handled seeing their pain while staying true to your principles. Within hours of our meeting, David's phone was buzzing constantly with calls from his parents, and I could see him getting more and more stressed with each conversation. He told me later that Patricia had gone into what he called crisis mode, calling emergency family meetings and consulting with lawyers about how to handle my defiance of their reasonable requests. Richard, according to David, was furious that someone from my background would have the audacity to reject their generous offer to join their family. They spoke about me like I was a hostile takeover attempt, rather than the woman their son wanted to marry. The Wellington family's response was swift and brutal in its calculated coldness. Patricia called me directly 2 hours after David left the coffee shop, her voice dripping with the kind of controlled fury that wealthy people use when they don't get their way. "I'm disappointed, Olivia," she said, drawing out my name like it tasted bitter in her mouth. "We offered you a place in our family, and you've chosen to prioritize money over love." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. They were the ones who had made money the centerpiece of our relationship by demanding the prenup in the first place. She went on to say that they had misjudged my character, and that perhaps it was better for everyone if David found someone more compatible with family values. Richard's approach was more direct and businesslike, calling me later that evening to make what he called one final offer. His tone was the same one I imagine he used in boardroom negotiations, cold and transactional, as he explained that they were willing to sweeten the deal if I reconsidered my position. He offered to include a clause in the prenup that would give me a modest allowance even in case of divorce, as if throwing me a few financial scraps would change my fundamental objection to the entire arrangement. When I politely but firmly declined, his mask slipped completely, and he told me that I was making the biggest mistake of my life by walking away from their family's security and status. But the most painful part wasn't the direct attacks on me. It was watching what this conflict was doing to David. He became a shell of the confident, loving man I had fallen in love with, torn between loyalty to his family and his feelings for me. He would call me crying after particularly brutal family meetings, telling me about how they painted me as a gold digger who was manipulating him, how they threatened to cut him off financially if he married me without the prenup. They used every weapon in their arsenal: guilt, fear, financial pressure, and emotional manipulation to convince him that choosing me would destroy his relationship with them forever. I realized that David wasn't just choosing between me and his family. He was choosing between the person he wanted to be and the person they had raised him to become. 3 days before our original wedding date, David showed up at my apartment at midnight, soaking wet from the rain and looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His usually perfect appearance was completely disheveled. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were red from what I could only assume were hours of crying and soul-searching. He stood in my doorway holding a single white rose from my mother's shop, and when he spoke, his voice was hoarse but determined. "I'm done letting other people decide what my life should look like." He told me that he had spent the last 72 hours in a hotel room, away from his family's influence, thinking about what kind of man he wanted to be and what kind of marriage he wanted to have. If you've ever watched someone you love find their courage at the last possible moment, please subscribe and like this video. I want to hear about the times when hope appeared just when you thought it was lost forever. David explained that he had finally told his parents the truth about how their behavior was destroying not just our relationship, but his respect for them as people. He had confronted them about their investigation into my family, their calculated cruelty during our meeting, and their complete disregard for his happiness in favor of their financial paranoia. I told them that if they couldn't love and accept the woman I want to marry, then they don't really love me either, he said, and I could hear the pain and liberation in his voice. For the first time since I had known him, David sounded like a grown man making his own decisions. The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had before, raw and honest in a way that stripped away all the pretenses and revealed who we really were underneath the pressure and expectations. David admitted that he had been a coward, allowing his family's money and approval to matter more than his own conscience, and he apologized for putting me in a position where I had to fight for basic respect and dignity. I shared my own fears about whether we could build a strong marriage when his family would always see me as an outsider, whether love could really overcome the kind of deep-seated class prejudice his parents had displayed. We talked until sunrise about our values, our non-negotiables, and what we would need from each other to make our relationship work, despite the forces trying to tear us apart. But the real breakthrough came when David told me about the ultimatum his parents had given him the day before: marry me with their prenup, or be cut off from the family fortune and business empire they had spent generations building. Instead of caving to their pressure like they expected, he had made a choice that surprised even himself. I realized that I don't want to inherit a fortune that comes with the condition of betraying the woman I love, he said. I'd rather build something of my own with you than live in a golden cage built by people who use money as a weapon. His decision to choose love over financial security wasn't just romantic. It was a fundamental shift in his character that gave me hope for our future. What emerged from that long night of honest conversation was a new understanding of what our relationship could be, built on mutual respect rather than family approval, and grounded in shared values rather than social expectations. We decided to postpone the elaborate wedding his parents had insisted on, choosing instead to have a simple ceremony with just our closest friends and my family, the kind of wedding we had originally dreamed about in my mother's flower shop. David's decision to stand up to his family wasn't just about winning me back. It was about becoming the man he had always had the potential to be, someone who chose courage over comfort and love over legacy. Together, we began to plan not just a wedding, but a life built on the foundation of equality, respect, and the kind of love that can't be bought or sold. Looking back now, 6 months after what I call the $10 million ultimatum, I can see how that crisis became the greatest gift our relationship ever received. The conflict with David's family forced us to examine not just our love for each other, but our individual values, our courage under pressure, and our willingness to fight for what we believed was right. Without that test, we might have built our marriage on the shaky foundation of family approval and social expectations, never knowing if our love was strong enough to weather real storms. The prenup controversy stripped away all the pretty illusions and showed us who we really were when everything was on the line. And somehow, miraculously, we liked what we discovered about each other. If this story has taught you something about standing up for your worth, please subscribe and like this video. I'd love to hear how you've handled situations where people tried to make you feel small because of money or status. The most important lesson I learned was that true love cannot coexist with conditions that diminish your dignity or worth as a person. When someone truly loves you, they don't ask you to sign away your equality or accept treatment that makes you feel less than whole. David's willingness to walk away from his family's fortune proved that he valued our partnership more than financial security. But more importantly, it proved to himself that he was capable of making difficult decisions based on principle rather than pressure. That discovery transformed him from a man living in his parents' shadow into someone capable of being an equal partner in our relationship. My grandfather's inheritance, which had seemed like such a blessing and then such a curse, ultimately became the catalyst for the most important conversation of my life about money, power, and self-respect. The $10 million forced David's family to show their true colors, but it also forced me to examine my own values and decide what I was willing to compromise for love. I realized that money is only as powerful as you allow it to be, and that people who try to use wealth to control others are actually revealing their own insecurity and fear. My grandfather's gift wasn't just financial. It was the opportunity to learn that my worth isn't negotiable, regardless of how much money is involved. The spiritual dimension of this experience cannot be overlooked, because it was my faith that gave me the strength to stand firm when everyone expected me to bend. Prayer and reflection helped me understand that God doesn't ask us to make ourselves smaller to fit into other people's worlds, but rather to use our gifts and blessings to lift others up and create positive change. The inheritance my grandfather left me came with the responsibility to honor his values of integrity, hard work, and treating people with dignity regardless of their social status. Every time I was tempted to just sign the prenup and avoid the conflict, I remembered his gentle hands counting out butterscotch candies for me as a child, and I knew he would want me to choose courage over convenience. Perhaps the most profound realization was that this entire ordeal wasn't really about David's family or their money at all. It was about my own journey toward understanding my worth and learning to demand the respect I deserved. Patricia and Richard Wellington were just the messengers delivering a lesson I needed to learn about not allowing other people's opinions or financial power to dictate my choices. Their rejection stung at first, but it ultimately freed me from the exhausting task of trying to earn approval from people who were never going to value me anyway. The real victory wasn't keeping David or gaining access to his family's wealth. It was discovering that I had the strength to walk away from anything that required me to betray my own principles, even if it meant losing everything I thought I wanted. The story I've shared with you today isn't just about one woman's struggle with a difficult family situation. It's about the universal challenge of maintaining your integrity when faced with pressure to compromise your values for security or acceptance. Every day, people around the world face their own versions of the Wellington family prenup, situations where they're asked to make themselves smaller, quieter, or more convenient in exchange for love, jobs, friendships, or opportunities. What I learned through this experience is that these tests of character are actually gifts in disguise, opportunities to discover just how strong and principled you really are when everything is on the line. The people who truly belong in your life will never ask you to diminish yourself to accommodate their insecurities or prejudices. Money reveals character in ways that nothing else can, both in the people who have it and in those who don't. David's parents used their wealth as a weapon to control and intimidate, but my grandfather used his inheritance as a tool to empower and protect his family's future. The difference wasn't in the amount of money involved, but in the hearts and intentions of the people controlling it. I learned that financial security built on the foundation of compromised principles is actually the most dangerous kind of poverty, because it costs you your soul while giving you the illusion of safety. True security comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for, regardless of your bank account balance. The importance of having people in your life who support your highest good cannot be overstated, and this experience taught me to value those relationships above all others. My mother's unwavering support, Mr. Thompson's professional guidance, and even David's eventual courage all reminded me that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. The people who truly love you will encourage your strength, not your compliance. They will celebrate your victories over adversity, not pressure you to avoid conflict for their own comfort. Surrounding yourself with people who believe in your worth is one of the most important investments you can make in your own happiness and success. Faith played a crucial role in giving me the courage to make difficult decisions, not just because of religious beliefs, but because faith teaches us that we are inherently valuable and deserving of respect, regardless of external circumstances. Whether your faith is religious, spiritual, or simply a deep belief in human dignity, holding on to those core convictions can guide you through situations where the right choice isn't the easy choice. Prayer and meditation helped me see beyond the immediate consequences of my decisions to the long-term impact on my character and self-respect, reminding me that temporary discomfort is a small price to pay for permanent integrity. Perhaps most importantly, this experience taught me that love without respect is just an attractive form of abuse, and that healthy relationships require both partners to value each other's dignity and autonomy. The fairy tale ending isn't about finding someone who will take care of you financially, but about finding someone who will fight for your right to be treated as an equal partner in your own life. David's transformation from someone who allowed his family to diminish me into someone who defended my worth was the real love story, not the romance novel version where the woman sacrifices her principles for the man's approval. True love multiplies your strength and confidence. It doesn't divide them or ask you to hide them to make others more comfortable. I'm ending this story 2.5 years later, and I want to tell you about the moment I finally decided to use my grandfather's inheritance. It wasn't for anything romantic or inspiring. It was when David came home from his second job, exhausted and frustrated, and told me that his car had broken down, and he didn't have money to fix it. He was working 60 hours a week trying to prove to himself that he could make it without his family's money, but we were barely getting by. And I watched him sacrificing his health and happiness for pride that wasn't even his own anymore. If you're struggling with when to compromise and when to stand firm, please subscribe and like this video. These aren't easy decisions, and sometimes the right answer changes with time and circumstances. That night, I called Mr. Thompson and told him I wanted to access the inheritance not for luxury or revenge, but to give us the breathing room to build our lives without the constant stress of financial survival. We used some of the money to pay off our debts, buy a modest house, and start a small business together, a consulting firm that helps families navigate financial planning and conflict resolution. The irony wasn't lost on me that our biggest trauma had become our professional expertise. David's relationship with his family remains complicated. His mother calls him once every few months, usually when she's had too much wine, to tell him she misses him and that there's always a place for him at home when he comes to his senses. His father sent him a business proposal last year, suggesting they could find a way to work together again if David was willing to be reasonable about family matters. We keep these conversations short and polite, but they always leave David sad and angry for days afterward. Healing isn't linear, and some relationships can't be fully repaired, no matter how much love or money is involved. The most unexpected consequence of our whole ordeal has been watching how it affected other people in our lives. Several of David's friends from his wealthy social circle quietly reached out to us over the years, sharing their own stories of family pressure and conditional love that they had never felt safe discussing before. My story gave them permission to examine their own situations and make some difficult choices about authenticity versus security. We've become accidental mentors to other couples dealing with class differences and family opposition, which feels like the most meaningful use of our painful experience. As for me, I've learned that strength isn't about never doubting your decisions. It's about making the best choice you can with the information you have and then living with the consequences without constant regret. There are still days when I wonder what our lives would have looked like if I had signed that prenup and tried to change his family's minds over time. Maybe I could have eventually won them over, or maybe I would have lost myself in the process. I'll never know, and I've made peace with that uncertainty. What I do know is that the woman I am today, scarred but stronger, realistic but still hopeful, is someone my grandfather would be proud of. And that's worth more than any amount of money or family approval could ever be. If this story taught you anything, it's that real life is messier than motivational posts make it seem. Sometimes doing the right thing costs more than you expected, and sometimes love isn't enough to fix the damage that family money can cause. But it's still worth fighting for, not the fairy tale version of love, but the real, complicated daily choice version that survives disappointment and grows stronger through struggle. Subscribe if you want more honest stories about life's hardest decisions, and remember that your worth isn't negotiable, even when the price of proving it is higher than you thought you could afford to pay.